Mothership on Solid Rock Radio begins now. Hear the best in new music, artist interviews, stories from the road, and more. You are now backstage, and here's your host, Mothership.
Hey everybody, my guest today is Matt Sassano. I'd describe Matt as a true overcomer in so many ways. I know you're going to love to hear his story. Let's just jump right in. So Matt, you and I met at KCF a few years back. I remember standing next to you holding the flag.
Yeah, that's right, man.
You were still kind of new on my radar back then. Tell us a little bit about your story.
It felt like an overnight success story, but it really wasn't. I've been doing music for a long time, maybe since 2010. I founded my first band, and I was in a small town called Canisteo, New York. There's more cows than people there. So it was kind of more five-piece type of band, like kind of your traditional rock band. And I had one of my very first songs by just a fluke was included on a video game called NASCAR, the game Inside Line, PlayStation, Xbox, and Wii. But at the time, I was so new. Like, I had a friend that was kind of the video game moderator, and he helped me get to that game. So I was new in the music scene, so I didn't know how to manage all that, like, weird success at the time. And so that opportunity was crazy, but it came and went. And then in 2014, my family and my stepdad, Steve, and my mom decided to move to Knoxville. And so through that, in a series of events, here we are today with me as a solo artist. So, it's been kind of a wild ride with its many phases. And it's funny how you just, grow into the role, the whole solo project thing. It's so crazy to see this thing take off. And I'm really grateful for, how far it's come in the time that it has.
Did you have experience playing instruments when you were young?
Well, I dabbled a little bit like on the youth worship team. So my first exposure to music was, I always loved rock, but I was the kid with blue hair on the youth worship team, and I was the pastor's son. So that was kind of my introduction into music. My mom was a piano player and was always heavily involved. Bass was kind of my first intro into music. I never planned to ever sing. And so that was kind of a turn of events of its own. But I found myself in this position where trying to start a band, you get like those people that are fair weather band members. Yeah, you just get discouraged because I was trying to draft singers in this small little town of Canisteo, New York. And every time I would draft a singer, a week later they would quit, or it's not for the faint of heart. And so, kind of a long story, but I was in this church service one time. I was really discouraged about just my direction in life and like the music and how it was going and all that kind of stuff. And it was a new church. This lady never had met me, and she stood me up in front of the entire congregation. And she said, can you come here real quick, son? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was kind of nervous. It was kind of like one of those weird things. But she was like, I really feel like God is telling me that he wants to use you in music. And I was all for that. I was like, all right, that's awesome. Because I had just, and then when she said he wants you to sing, that's when my heart stopped and dropped out of my chest. And I was like, there is no way I will ever sing. And I had like a 2-3 week battle with God over just like, are you sure you heard that right? I just eventually just kind of grew into this role. Like I said, it wasn't something that I initially planned. It was something that was birthed out of necessity and just being at the right place at the right time.
It sounds like you wanted to be in music since you were pretty young.
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved music, and it was really the first thing that ever made me feel empowered. I don't know how much you know about my testimony, but I grew up with a lot of disabilities. I have cerebral palsy, and I have another disability called dyscalculia, which only 4% of the world has. So I grew up with a lot of just feeling misplaced all the time. I didn't really understand that I had dyscalculia up until I was 19. So there was a lot of questions, and I struggled in my education and in my home life. And so I would typically just listen to music and zone out. And that was my way to cope with the things that I was going through. And so from an early age, it was Disciple, it was Skillet, it was just a whole bunch of just different eclectic music. But it was really the first thing that gave me an identity and distracted me basically from some of the areas of life that I didn't really enjoy or, had to live through.
Can you explain dyscalculia?
So dyscalculia is one of those things that I didn't get diagnosed with up until I was 19. It really was kind of a lesser known disability. And through life, it's kind of a place and space disability. It's mathematical. So things like reading graphs, things like I get lost very easily. I can't drive because of it, and I can't master the rules of the road. I couldn't and so it impacted so much because you think about when you can't discern directions. The way I like to describe it is every time I get into a car, I have to fully trust the driver because I don't discern directions. It feels like you're being kidnapped. So,
wow.
Yeah. And so I have to really my mind can't discern okay, here's the route to, unless it's fairly close or I can see it. So it feels like you're lost. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to read a map or discern directions. And so oftentimes it just feels like you're lost. It feels like you didn't know how you got to a certain place. And so, yeah, it's like being kidnapped. And so in school, it always posed a problem because I couldn't find my way around. There was a lot of occupational and physical therapists that would come in and try to figure out what was wrong. And so I was very much like the education system's lab rat trying to figure me out from a very young age. To even it impacts me now. If I didn't have my stepdad Steve who's been gracious enough to drive me on all these tours, I wouldn't be able to get around. And so I'm very grateful, but I'm also very reliant even to this day on the people around me.
Wow, that's got to affect every part of your life in one way or another.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where people don't realize when you can't drive and you can't discern directions, what inevitably happens is that you spend a lot of time in isolation. You start to see people in your peer groups surpass you in every major milestone because you feel lost. You can't do math. I remember, got out of school in 11th grade to go grab my GED, and I thought that would be something that would be really cool to do, and I couldn't end up passing the GED portion just because of the math. So I spent the better part of 2 or 3 years just failing through the GED, and I actually graduated high school through college because in a weird way, just by a God moment, it was really weird. The teacher that I had at this particular college that I was going to was doing a thesis, and she said, I have a theory that he won't be able to do. I'm writing a paper, and I have a theory that he might not be able to do regular math, but if I put him in statistics, he'll pass. And just by God's grace, I was literally, after 3 or 4 years of struggling through graduating high school, it worked. And wow. I was able to get the credits that I needed through college to graduate high school. It was a backwards thing if I ever heard of it. And, through life, without a high school diploma, it's hard to get a job. So I remember having to lie on applications or, try to figure out ways to make it. It was crazy.
That is crazy. Does it affect you in any way when you're writing music?
Not specifically. I remember when I first got into music, though, I wanted to be a guitar player. That was kind of my first desire. And so with dyscalculia, it's hard past certain steps and functions. So in the guitar world, when you say okay, I need you to put your first finger on the first fret, second string, it starts to get jumbled in my head, those numbers and those commands. Mm-hmm. And when I tried to learn guitar, it just really didn't work very well. When I picked up bass, I could kind of do it by ear, and I have a really, really good ear. And so it was a weird thing. And then with singing and writing lyrics, luckily it never affected it, but my plans to be Jimi Hendrix definitely didn't work out. So,
I think that's true for most people.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the music that you write? What kind of genre?
Okay. So I would say it's a cross between rock and EDM. Traditionally, in my first projects, it was more along the lines of just traditional rock. As a solo artist, I kind of had to find a way around that because if the music is guitar driven and I am the only one on the stage, it kind of looks a little funky, you know what I mean? So I got involved in this with this producer here locally called Colton Carnley, and he introduced me to the world of EDM and electronics. And I was like, well, this is kind of cool. It has kind of the same cinematic bend as rock and roll, but in a way, you don't have to have a full band. And so that kind of started the journey as a solo artist. And then In Defiance is basically Josiah, Prince, and I's creation, and it kind of blends the rock and EDM, but has a little bit more bite than my last stuff, and so I'm really pumped about it. It's made quite the impact, and I feel like I'm really happy with the sound and just like the overall message of this EP. It's really made an impact.
You're listening to Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio.
Miller Express LLC is a Solid Rock Radio business ministry partner specializing in delivery, setup, and relocation of storage buildings. More info by calling 803-300-7594.
How did you get hooked up with Josiah? Was it with the label or was it before that?
So I had a round of songs that I wanted to create, and it was my initial plan to go back to Colton. Well, we're great friends, but he just inevitably was kind of busy. So I was like looking for a producer, and I saw on the Grizzly Awards that he had won Producer of the Year.
Okay.
And so yeah, it was kind of that like spurred on the thought of like, okay, like maybe I'd be in great hands being with Josiah. And then we kind of connected that way.
Okay.
And, I owe it to the Grizzly Awards for just like bringing it to my memory and going like, all right, I think I could do this. Josiah's in a great band. I've never worked with him before, but I think that this would be really cool. And we just clicked, man. Like from the second we got into studio, I brought in 5 songs, and I just watched this EP kind of evolve and change as we got into studio, and it was just an awesome experience. I'm just so grateful.
That's awesome. You don't get much better than Josiah.
He's just one of those guys that just has an optimistic attitude to work with, and you find yourself just challenged as a musician. And it's just a great environment, man, and like I said, I brought in 5 songs that I thought were going to be this EP. And off the cuff, like for whatever reason, 2 out of the 5 songs, just being in that creative environment, like helped me write it. I had Not My Name was not going to be on the EP. That ended up going #1 on the CMW charts. And then another song called Sorry Is a Dirty Word was another just off the cuff from being with Josiah and being in that creative environment. Just was like, okay, I watched that EP kind of change and do what it's doing. And like I said, man, yeah, it was just such an awesome experience.
Did he help you find a new way to write?
Not necessarily, but like when 2 great lyric people get together, it just clicks, you know what I mean? And so sometimes he would help me like shorten a sentence or be like, dude, like, let's cut this word in half, or like, let's cut this phrase. This might. Okay. So I found that like after I got back from Josiah's, I definitely grew as a writer. I've always been super analytical. So I've always had that talent. Like being with somebody like Josiah just forces you to kind of even take it that much further and like focus on even the finer things. Let's make this lyric sharper, or, stuff like that,
I would imagine working with Josiah would be one of the highlights of your ministry.
It's just been an amazing ride, especially in these last few years. I would say going to work with Josiah was definitely a highlight. Being on now, I'm getting up ready for my 4th tour with Seventh Day Slumber coming up in May. Being signed to Rockfest was amazing. And also what has been super cool is I do a lot of prison outreaches and concerts. So we'll go into like maximum security prisons, and the stories that you hear are just amazing. Like I remember getting a standing ovation after playing Not My Name at the end of the set, and people will come up to you and say the most shocking things. Like I had an inmate come up to me, and I'm just like shaking hands, and when you're in that environment, you don't know anybody's backstory. So he leans in and he says, man, I just want to tell you, like I've killed so many people, but what you said tonight, yeah, I was like, what? And so he's like, I just want to tell you, man, I've killed so many people, but at the same time, like what you said impacted me tonight. And so that'll startle you, you know what I mean? Just not knowing who you're impacting, or like, who you're in front of. And so to hear that was crazy. And then like, I remember this other inmate that said, I spent my life entrenched in witchcraft, and I just want to let you know that because of this concert, I'm going back to my cell. I'm going to rip my witchcraft book up, and I'm going to get myself a Bible. And it's stories like that just continue to just like shock and make this all very unique experience.
Amazing. What kind of things do you hear from your fans?
Oh man, it's so crazy because since we released the In Defiance EP and like Dear God came out, I've gotten everything from somebody had lost their mother through the holiday season during the Christmas season, and they were saying that Dear God got them through. Oftentimes when I'm out on the road with Seventh Day Slumber, we'll play Not My Name, and I'll kind of tell my testimony about overcoming disabilities, and the people that have disabilities will flock to me after the show and talk about how the song made them feel less alone. I mean, I even got to join just for fun before a concert with Seventh Day Slumber, special needs kind of yoga class. And so I got to go hang out with them and take pictures and have pizza and all that kind of stuff. And what I think Not My Name has done in particular is take a topic that not typically anybody really talks about and made it into a CMW chart topper, which is like unprecedented. When I wrote that song, I never really had an example to go by because I'm like, there really isn't songs about disabilities. How do I make this something that speaks to them, but also will be accessible to the general public? And I think that was such a unique thing because it's opened up such a long overdue conversation. And tomorrow I'm actually going to be doing a show at the Bend Church in Cookeville, Tennessee, which is my home church. And it's a free show specifically designed for people with disabilities. So I'm super excited.
I think it speaks to everybody because we all have some type of something that's holding us back. It might not be a physical disability. It's relatable to everybody on some level of where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what me and Josiah were kind of talking about. I was like, I want to make it relate to everybody, but at the same time, so that's why label me, label me as one of the lyrics and call me by my pain, because whether it's a disability or you just feel like the black sheep, everybody comes in with labels. And I'm sure when you saw me with Seventh Day Slumber, you saw like I had that hoodie with all those derogatory names on it, and asked the crowd, what labels have you come in here with tonight? And oftentimes when I'm back at the merch table, somebody will say like, I went through my whole life being called ugly. I went through my whole life believing this and that about me because my father or my mother used to label me with this and that. And so it's just been a very unique conversation starter. This is not a plug by any means, but I have a t-shirt that has like the names that people call you, and then it says Not My Name. So I go into a gas station, after a show to go grab food while I'm on the road, and it's actually gives me a chance because people will be like, why does your shirt say that? And so it gives me a chance to kind of talk to people at random about like why my shirt says loser on it, and I get the chance to share my testimony,
That's great. Maybe that's your anthem?
Yeah, I mean, to this point, Not My Name and Dear God have been the two main chorus of that EP, but I feel like I've got more to give. I'm currently in process of just continuing to stockpile music for future releases and just have so much. Like I've said, this EP kind of opened me back up to like why I got into music in the first place and reminded me like there's so many people that need to hear that message of hope and not being alone. And so I think so far those are my anthems, but I've got so much more to give and I'm currently working on more.
Give us a discography rundown.
So back in the day, I did like this with Travis Wyrick was my first like producer that did my rock stuff before I was a solo artist. So I had like this band called Transparent Soul, and I did a 5-song EP with Travis. And then I moved and did my Transcend album, which is kind of more like a pop EDM. I was kind of finding my voice as a solo artist. It was a good CD and it had some good songs on it, but I feel like I was finding my voice and finding like where I belong as a solo artist. And then now there's the In Defiance EP that I feel like has taken all these elements from the hard rock to the EDM, meshed them all together, put Josiah in the mix, and now you've got, what I am today.
What's our next single?
Well, I have a lot of just different ideas for singles. I haven't been hitting studio yet, but I've been writing everything from patriotic songs. There's a patriotic song called America First that I've been working on. It talks about standing up for what this nation was founded on. And I've also got songs about domestic abuse that I faced and mental health issues, more what people recognize me for. And so there's quite the mix of new music that I just have yet to kind of produce, but it's been awesome. Always keeping busy.
Check us out on Facebook at I'm with Mothership.
How about a favorite tour story?
My goodness. Well, you have to realize, like, I'm just as much a fan as I am a musician. So I grew up listening to Seventh Day Slumber and the bands that I've been on tour with. And so being backstage and making animal noises with Seventh Day Slumber is like a weird, you know what I mean? So
weird flex.
It's just like a weird thing where you get to see a different side of somebody. Or like, I remember I was kind of the new person on the Seventh Day Slumber tour. And mind you, like, I look up to these guys, all that kind of stuff. And I'm just trying to like engage in conversation. And for whatever reason, when I was talking to Blaze, the drummer for Seventh Day Slumber, like Blaze would try to make up random words to try to like confuse me and haze me a little bit. I'd be like, dude, it was a great ride over here to, California. He'd be like, yeah, you got to watch out for those Fablos though. And, they definitely, like, he would just make up like weird little animal names that don't exist. I'd be like, oh, what? And then he just would bust out laughing.
That's Blaze.
Yeah. So he's definitely one of those that just like get you to laugh all the time. Yeah, I guess it's just a different thing coming from like a fan of these bands to like seeing now like their personalities and like, just their sense of humor is like a weird thing. So I guess that would be a tour memory, seeing like your heroes and the people you looked up to growing up in that environment of just like being goofy and crazy.
I assume when you go to some of these festivals, you might fangirl a little bit over some folks.
Yeah, I'm still in that stage. I never want to lose that. You know what I mean? It's cool, man. Just being able to be around these people that you've looked up to for so many years and like seeing how Josiah works and seeing how Seventh Day Slumber does their thing. And now I feel like I've become kind of part of the family. So it's a strange thing.
Yeah. Who is somebody you would love to meet and talk to that's in the industry?
I really love what John Cooper's doing with Cooper Stuff and his podcast and how much he really takes a stand and still never compromises his music, and it's accessible to everybody. And so I really would love to meet John one of these days, man. That I feel like him and I would get along super great and have a lot to talk about.
I've talked about my journey before from going from a fan to part of the music industry. It kind of happened organically. Is that how it kind of was for you?
It goes back to what I said about, growing into the role that God wants you to be in. It's like my initial plan was really to just play bass and write songs. And here you go. It's like, and you're finding that same thing in your journey where it's like one thing leads to another. And whenever you get to a certain part of your journey, there's always going to be a new mountain to climb. And I have to give it up to the people from Rock on Purpose back in 2020 when COVID happened. I just was bored out of my mind and there's no gigs going on. And I really have to give it up to them because I started writing for them, and that kind of introduced me to Mary, introduced me to all sorts of people that are now, really impacting what I was doing in a time when I thought like music was over and it's never going to happen again. I was like, well, I'm just going to try to write and meet bands. And it's crazy how you guys have all kind of contributed. And 2 years later, here I am, and I'm where God wants me. It's weird how that can happen.
Yeah, that's one thing I've learned. I've seen this happen over and over again is when you're in that moment in your life, especially when you're young, you can't even conceive of 40 years from now what that impact has made in somebody's life. And as I began to get older and see kids that would come up to me and say, you taught me in VBS, yeah, I am now a pastor of a church, or whatever.
Yeah.
And when we had kids in youth ministry who are now pastors and missionaries, and it takes many, many years to see that. And sometimes you don't see that, but you know that if you continue to pour yourself out into people, give them hope, let them know they matter no matter where they are, and that God loves them. If you just keep a steady course, you have no idea what that'll do in 40 years and how many people those people will touch.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty insane how that just kind of domino effect, throughout your life.
That's right. It's literally catapulted me into the industry where I can minister to people and minister to bands. And if I can edify you, build you up, then I have a part in that ministry, and it's part of my story too.
I love it, man. That's so cool.
One of the things I've had opportunity to do is the Grizzly Awards, and you were nominated last year and this year.
I'm super excited about the Grizzlies this year, and I'm super excited that I'm nominated for quite a few things, actually. I was really surprised. I was nominated last year for Cover Song of the Year, and it's just awesome to see that award show just grow each and every year, man. Like, you guys have done an amazing job at just creating a space for rock people that often, get overlooked to a lot of the more like CCM kind of stuff. And we want to remind people, hey, man, we're still out here too, And so you guys have been awesome creating your own lane. And I think that's really what creates revolutions in some way or does something big. People just step up and say, well, I see a gap to fill, and we're going to fill it. And pretty soon that becomes the new thing. And so I'm super excited for how the Grizzlies have progressed. I really see a lot of potential in it, and it's awesome to be a part of it right now. It was the Grizzly Awards that networked me with Josiah. And then from Josiah, somewhat vouched on my behalf to say, hey, I got this new kid in here, and would you like to take him on tour? And so after Badger and Joe long enough, finally it opened up my first major tour. So that was all because of the Grizzly Awards.
That's crazy. Has writing music been a healing thing for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it was the one thing, like I said, that kind of made me feel empowered. And it's great to see that my pain and my suffering, whether it be going through disabilities, whether it be going through abuse from my father, it's great to see that that stuff hasn't gone to waste. I suffered many years and was, very doubtful that God might even use me. And music has given me an outlet to see the purpose and to hear from other people. And when I was born, people said I would never walk. I would never see. I would never live a normal life. I had a teacher one time that made my mom so angry because she said, well, your son's not normal. It's crazy to see that this music has given misfits like myself a place to inspire others and the healing, man. Yeah, when I was at my lowest, when I was at my darkest point, music was the thing that gave me a voice and a purpose. And so it's great to be here.
What's something your disability has allowed you to do?
I think there's a certain level of empathy that comes from being disabled. And it's really motivated my whole entire path because through empathy, I not only was the kid that was locked in the psych ward for mental health issues because, I was depressed about life because of the disability, but it also gave me a chance, years later, work in the psych ward and everything that I've been through fuels my music. So without the disability, I wouldn't be who I am, and I wouldn't have the unique voice that I have. And so it's like, would I go through it all again? Maybe not. I don't like the fact, there was many uncertain years, where it was just like, oh my gosh, I can't drive. I can't do this. I can't do that. And in this competitive world, you're just insecure sometimes as it is. So when you start to think about okay, I have this disability. I'm fully reliant on a lot of my family. What does this look like when I want to get married? Or what does this look like in the dating scene? Or it impacts so much more than people even realize. But through that pain was birthed the music. I've grown. I think I owe a lot of what I've gone through to the person I am today.
What would you say to someone who's struggling with some sort of disability?
For most people, this is a really tough thing. I just want to tell them that they're loved and they're cared for, and they're not alone. I think sometimes I might not have the complete answer to remedy your situation, But I think that through this music and through my life, if I were to meet you in person, I would say, you're not alone, and you are loved and you are cared for, and you do have a purpose, whether it's a rock musician or somebody who draws or paints, or everybody's got a specific thing that they can do. You know what I mean? And I would just encourage that. When I was on tour, I got to join a special needs yoga class. I met this other girl in Ohio. She has cerebral palsy. Her name's Allison Keller, and now she's doing videos where she translates rock bands' songs into sign language, and that was all birthed through me, And so, I would say that, you just lean into what God is calling you to do, and even when you don't fully understand the purpose in your pain, I believe that everyone has a purpose in their pain.
Absolutely. So what have you got coming up?
For the whole month of May, up until June, I will be taking part in the tour with Seventh Day Slumber. We're going to be doing some California dates, some Oregon dates. There's just so much during that month. So I've got my work cut out for me, but it's going to be exciting, man.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you on the road.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more great music, and check out my blog page on the Solid Rock Radio website for my guests' social media links. If you've missed any of my past interviews, you can find them uploaded to podcast.solidrockradio.org. Have a wonderful week, and let's be kind to one another.